Today I want to share one of my favorite techniques for running role-playing games, and that is the cinematic montage. This introductory technique is really fantastic to get players into the game very quickly, perfect for convention games, but also for the beginning of a new campaign. When I introduce this technique at the table, the first thing I do is ask if they've ever seen an 80s TV show that introduces characters. I might remind them of something like that A-Team intro probably gave you the idea, but here's how I explain it to my players. I'll say something like, okay, we're going to do an 80s style cinematic montage. If you've ever seen an old TV show where there is a theme song playing, and then we go one by one and they introduce the characters, and each character is doing something iconic that shows off what they are like. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to go around the table. Each of you is going to give me what your character is doing that captures the essence of your personality. Maybe it's something you were doing on the way here to this adventure, or something that you did earlier in your life that was key. Think about that thing and tell us what your short scene is, right? And then the players will do that. And ideally, it comes out something like this. And what's fun is that really players seem to grab onto this concept pretty easily. Even if they weren't around in the 80s to watch these kinds of shows, they've probably seen other shows like them and understood that idea. It's a little cheesy, right? The character might ham it up a bit, might give a look at the screen and, show off, or fall and do something silly, right? Something kind of like this.
Come and knock on our door.
Come and knock on our door.
We've been waiting for you.
We've been waiting for you.
Where the kisses are hers and his, three's company too.
Old TV has its issues, of course. So we try to, at our table, have better representation and depiction of everybody. But what you're hoping to do at your table with this introduction is that it can be a really fast method for the characters to communicate the essence of their character. And that's what I love about this technique. It is surprisingly effective. There are a lot of techniques out there that when I try to use them, some players jump into it and others don't. And this is something that almost always a player will volunteer to start, or I might pick if nobody does. And they will actually do a really great job of explaining how their wizard is, summoning monsters to fight off a foe, or how they are the quick rogue that's rappelling down some castle wall, and then they, flip around and fire their crossbow and then drop the rest of the way into an opening and, come away with the treasure, something like that, right? They'll come up with these neat ideas to introduce their characters, and as each one does that, the next one often gets better, right? The players feed off of one another and realize what this is like. And very quickly, you achieve really high, really by the second, third player that's going around, they all really know what they're doing. And they're registering what the other characters are doing. Sometimes they might play off of it, right? And this can be the kind of thing where you have two players that might be together doing a particular thing, and then two others end up in another scene. That can be fun. In fact, you can do this deliberately, and this works really well with a campaign. So if you think of your typical campaign that you might be running, and you want to start it off with saying, okay, some of you are riding on a caravan while the others are in a tavern, and you want the group to kind of meet up and get to know each other. This can be an excellent way to do it. You can do the montage of the two people that are riding together in the wagon, and then you can have the others that are in the saloon, and they are describing what they're doing there, and then the groups come together and you can begin play, right? But that montage concept really sets it all up nicely. Montages are great because the players will often realize that the ideal scene says a little something about them, right? Makes them look cool, or not if they want to, be sort of like a character that's down on their luck. But that says something about your character too, if you make that choice. But often they'll lean into something that becomes a memorable part of their character, right? Maybe the player is very lawful and they're into the law, so they depict their character as trying to, stop some miscreants that are causing trouble in the town, right? That tells everybody at the table what this character is like. Someone else might depict something where they are gambling and maybe even stealing things like under the table or palming cards. And that tells everybody what this character is like.
The love boat promises something for everyone. Set a course for adventure, your mind on a new romance. And love won't hurt.
So they're often very revealing scenes that really help build. In fact, I find that sometimes for one-shots, players are actually learning about their character as they're doing their own montage, and it helps them lean in one direction towards play that then pays off for the rest of that one-shot session, say at a convention or something like that. So it works really well that way.
Nanu, nanu. Shazbat.
Here are some different ideas for ways you can use cinematic montages. So the first and easiest is a freeform scene. This is kind of like what I was describing earlier, where I just say, hey, introduce your character. Tell me what cool thing you're doing, right? This works well for a lot of situations where the genre is well established, right? We know it's a game of D&D, or we know it's Blade Runner, right? We understand the concept of what's going on, and the players can just decide how they want to portray their character. I'm a rogue, or I am a, android replicant that's doing this kind of situation, right? That is we just leave it up to the players. It's free form. They come up with something neat that they're doing, right? I'm late at night working in the office, or, it's a game like Pasión de las Pasiones, and we're saying like, oh, I'm the maid and I'm cleaning when I look and I find some money and I take it and I pocket it, right? And we're leaning into that sort of trope, right? This is a free form scene. You can just do whatever you want. Another way to do it is to come up with a specific intro scene. So I might say you are all on a boat and you're traveling through a storm. Tell me what you're doing to help that kind of captures the nature of your character, right? And that's where a fighter might say, oh, I, take all of the cargo and I'm securing it by lashing it down, right? And the wizard might kind of cast spells that accomplish kinds of different things. And the rogue is, climbing through the rigging, right? Each of the players leans into what their characters would do in the scene and describes based on that prompt that you gave them. Intro scenes can be really great. An early role-playing game experience that really stuck in my mind was when a DM, for the first time I'd ever played with them, described the beginning of the Deadlands campaign they were running in terms of cinematography. Like they described the camera zooming in or panning across a canyon and then turning towards our characters. And we then really leaned into describing what we were doing because it was so easy to follow the way they had set up that introductory scene, right? So you can have a lot of fun with that. Think about what approach you want to use. Do you just want to leave it to them, or do you want to set up a kind of scene that they can take some of those elements and play with them? That can be really fun. I have used intro scenes to good effect when I have to shorten a game that I'm running as a one-shot at a convention or a game day or in a place like a store, where what I've done is taken the first encounter, which often a first encounter is a little bit introductory, or it can be, and I take that first encounter and I describe the elements of it, right? You are in a alleyway when all of a sudden foes come out from the sewers and they're surrounding you. The foes are, rat folk. What do you do? And then the players explain how they defeated them, right? And then I can go straight to, after that little going around the table, everybody introduces their character. I can say, well, here's what you found on them and the note that leads you to the next thing, right? So you can really just resolve that first scene in a very short amount of time and accomplish both one scene worth of the adventure and the introduction all at once, which is really useful as an intro scene. As I mentioned before, you can also use a split screen technique where you say, okay, some of you are in a tavern, some of you are on the arriving wagon. What is it that happens that sets up this situation? Describe your characters in each of these two places. That is also neat because it creates some sort of unity between different players, right? This works really well when there is something that naturally creates that split. So, for example, when I ran a Tomb of Annihilation Dungeons and Dragons campaign, around half of the characters were from Chult itself, and half were arriving new. So I put half of them on a boat arriving. They described a sort of battle that happened at sea and dangers that they overcame while explaining who their characters were. And the other half were already in the port, and so they narrated things from the perspective of being already in Chult, right? And that's a natural split screen. So if you find that half your characters, work for the police force and the other half work for the gang, well, then that could be a nice split screen introduction that you bring in, right? Lots of different games could do that. A game of Mistborn, right? Something like that, where you have these natural divisions of different types of characters. Or if you have people who are members of different departments in let's say an espionage game, and they're from different agencies or something like that, right? A game of Nice Black Agents could work that way, where you divide them up into these groupings, and that could be really cool. Now, you can use this technique in more ways than just as an introduction. You can, in fact, use the cinematic montage as a way to resolve a scene. So when you have a scene that maybe is going a bit long, and this actually you'll find in role-playing games like Draw Steel will actually advocate this type of approach. So let's say you've got this scene and it's going a little long. You could decide, okay, we're running a little long on time. This is especially useful to call this out in a convention and say, let's talk about how you finish off the rest of these foes. You've already taken, and by the way, I usually only shortcut a scene when the scene has played out. And I think the characters are pretty happy with what's already happened. I don't want to rob people of the agency of enjoying a scene. But if you already took out the boss and all that's left is the minions, I might say, okay, your characters continue this fight, though we're not going to due to time constraints. Tell me what each of you do to help finish this battle, right? We're just going to go around. Each of you tell me what happens in this last few seconds. And that's where, I take 2 out with my bow in a single shot. And then the person describes things. And they don't need to expend resources, right? You can just have fun explaining what you're doing as a player, how you do this, what kind of neat thing you do. And that can be something that's a lot more fun and way faster than resolving the scene. When you do this, do pay attention to how your players react. Some players want to play out the game no matter what. And that change of how the game is being run can be a thing for them. You can use this for resolving a scene also, not just to finish the resolution of a scene, but really to completely run a narrative scene. So, where we might do a combat, you could actually narrate it. If it's not particularly critical to play it out, and if maybe say there are a lot of combats already, you might say, all right, this next scene, we're going to do it narrative. Maybe you want to add some dice, or maybe not. You could do it completely narrative, or maybe you say, make me one attack roll. And this is going to be a capture of how this combat went for you. Give me what that attack roll represents, right? And so, somebody rolls a crit and they can just go to town on amazing things they did. Somebody rolls a 1, it's the exact opposite, and everything in between, right? And that could be a way to just resolve a scene purely narratively. More typically, we wouldn't do it for combats. And so it's worth having it as a go-to approach if you want to do something like travel, right? Where we are going from point A to B, and we don't really want to have an entire encounter, either because of the timing of what we're doing, if we're doing a one-shot, or just because we have important things we want to try to accomplish, either in the destination or the place you're taking off from, or both. And so that middle part, you want to get through it pretty quickly. And you might say, okay, you spend 2 days traveling. Let's go around the table, and each of you tell me one fun thing that happened when you were going through it. A little bit like this idea of the intro scene, I would try to provide some feedback in this case instead of doing it freeform. So I might say, the first 2 players, when you start out from camp, or the town, and you head towards the fort, whatever the thing might be, your origin, your destination, you might say, for the first 2 of you, what do you do early on in the trip as you're going through deep aspen pine forest, right? And have them describe that. Then you might say something like, afterwards, you end up in an area where the mountains rise up. It's rocky and a lot of rocky outcroppings, beautiful scenes. You can see long distances. What is a danger that you overcome, right? And you could go through that. I'll have a video relatively soon that will add to some of what I ran at GameholeCon this year, where I was talking about exploration and some approaches to using narrative travel as an option. And also the idea that when you rest, you might want to have a narrative scene where players talk through the day's events or ask other questions that can be kind of neat narration and role playing between the different characters. But this idea of having a scene be purely cinematic, narrative, montage style can be a lot of fun as an option to use. The more that you use it, the easier it is. So for example, if your players in a new campaign started with a cinematic montage, they now know this technique, right? And then if later on you have a narrate to me what happened in this day of travel, it'll be easier for them to want to be a part of that. So the more you use this in small places where it's an obvious fit, the easier that you can use it in other ways and sort of have that be something that the players will be receptive to. As always, keep an eye out, talk to your players, right? Did you like that? Was that cool? What would they make that more normal? Was there anything that, felt wrong about it? The more you understand your players and they feel they can speak up, you can work with them to develop the approach that will work for everybody. Another way that you can use the cinematic montage is as a transition, where you have from one scene to another, right? Walking down the hallway between two rooms, especially if it's a very long adventure. If you think of something like classic Dragonlance adventures, they often have these big sprawling areas underground, or the One Ring with going through something like Moria. You want to transition from one area of the dungeon, the caverns, to another and reflect the passage of time. Then this as a transition can be a really nice way to do a cinematic montage. Something you can do as part of these techniques is to look at the mechanics of the game and how you can use those to reinforce what's going on and to tailor your approach. So if you're running a game of Daggerheart, right, you could look into the idea of make me a roll and let's just see whether it's hope or fear, right? Or make me one skill check, see if it succeeds and whether it succeeds with hope and fear, and then tell me what that represents, right? And you can lean into the aspects of the game. You could do something similar and draw steel with a roll of those dice and see how that the tier of success that it would have represented, and allow players to maybe use skills and things like that to help create that narrative that's being put together. One of the things about making a great cinematic introduction, and we talked about how TV shows can be a little dated in how they represented people and the types of scenes that were there, we will get better outcomes from our cinematic montage if we have already had a session 0 where players understand the kind of play that we want to see at the table. If we know what everybody is looking for in the type of game experience they have, then these montages will play a lot better. There are a lot of ways that we can adapt these techniques to fit particular needs. If you've ever watched the Community TV show where they do episodes where they play Dungeons and Dragons, the DM kind of rapid fires what the players do. In fact, rolls for them and tells them what happens to their character, which is really interesting and sort of does the explanation for them. But a way that you could play off of that to achieve what that show does, if you've seen it, it's sort of very exciting because the DM's just quickly saying, here's what happens to you and here's what's happened to you. And it's all very, very quick. You can do that a bit by saying, okay, I want everybody to give me a roll. And if you achieved, DC blah, if you hit a target number of X, raise your hand, right? And you could actually go through in a narrative scene like that and say whether somebody succeeds a particular task. So you could set a scene of, say, something like, we're all on this ship that is looking like it's going to sink. hold your hand up if you succeeded. Okay, here's what's going on, and you could do that. But I would use such a technique sparingly, right? In general, you want to have the players drive the action, and part of the fun is seeing them narrate things. And the reason for this is because they will include in their narration aspects of their characters and sometimes of other characters as well. And so it's really neat to see when a player says, my character is doing the following. And in fact, hey, I use what you did, and they point at another player, what their character did. And I'm going to use that and move forward, right? Those create interesting narrative situations. Or if it's the end of the day after a long day of travel, and you're going to resolve that through narration, if one player feeds off of the other characters, that creates some really neat interactions there. And so you don't want to rob that by just always being in charge of it. Now, that should be a thing you only do sparingly. I've been focusing on DMs, but it's important to think about what players can do to lean into this montage system. So if you're a player, think through what you can do to make the most out of a montage-like introduction. In fact, even when someone calls just for normal character introductions, you can take a montage approach, and you might find that other players that go after you will also do the same. So think about the following things. Action. When you are giving your montage introduction, you can lean into action so that it's fun and exciting, right? We're all here to have fun. And so describing the neat, cool things your character can do are neat. And you don't have to cover everything. You just want to lean into something awesome that your character does, right? And that is iconic of your character, right? So what is your character most likely to do to defeat foes or surpass a challenge, right? And so in a particular game, it might be I'm firing my blaster rifle, or it might be I draw my sword and quickly dispatch 2 foes. It might be the way you approach things, right? Swinging from a rope, or jumping over barrels, barrel roll around the corner like a traditional 80s TV show. And that approach is our second thing. So how do you approach situations? How do you solve problems? Even if you do a little bit of action, right, like firing your crossbow, you might then quickly wink at an NPC because that speaks to your approach. Or if you're like playing a barbarian type combat approach that you just, you fight everything. And a lot of what you do is that sort of like in the A-Team, right? If you're going to be just the guy who is the beat everything up, well, you can do that as well. And so that can be part of your approach. You beat everybody down, and then maybe there is like a document you're supposed to sign and you break that in half, right? That is your approach. And so you can communicate that. You can also look at like your ethos, right? What are you into? Like if you think about the original Dungeons and Dragons factions, right? Are you Emerald Enclave? Are you Lord's Alliance, right? What is your ethos, your way of looking at life? Are you a priest? And so therefore a moment of contemplation to your deity right after you defeat a foe, right? Do you do that? Is your ethos something like you save somebody that had their purse taken away, but then you also took a few dollars out of it before you gave it to them, right? Things like that are very interesting and speak to who your character might be. So by sharing that ethos, you're making it super fun for everybody, and the DM is going to pick up ideas of how to play off of your character as well. They'll know what to expect from you and how to lean into it. The last thought is tie-ins. And this is really that as you're going around the table, you will have a couple things happen. One is you'll have learned a little bit about the adventure, especially if there's some sort of theme communicated, but also you'll hear other characters do introductions. And so it's really cool if your montage ties into that, right? Ties into the DM's settings, the DM's themes, but maybe also to what the characters did. So if one character introduces their big barbarian, rushing through and pummeling all these melee guys, you might describe how you are the archer up top, picking off anybody that used ranged weapons that could have been a problem for that barbarian. And maybe to sort of turn the table, right when you think you've gotten all the foes, the barbarian climbs up the wall and takes out the guy that was about to hurt you, right? So you kind of show how you helped one player and how that player then helped you, right? You're creating this relationship and sort of saying, hey, maybe you and I are buddies in this adventure, right? And that can be sort of fun, right? If you create tie-ins like that. If someone describes them as an alchemist, maybe you want to describe yourself as a person that's always up for trying out the alchemical creations of that person. And so you might segue off of their montage where they're brewing potions by saying that you're actually testing one of the potions and it transforms you in some way and you run off and, do the things that your character would do. But you had that little tie-in to help create that connection with another character, right? And that's a really fun way of doing it. So hopefully this is helpful to you players out there, or DMs who also play, or ways to encourage your players to participate in these sort of montages. So I hope you enjoy cinematic montages as much I have. It has been one of the best tools that I've used over the years in organized play, conventions, and home campaigns to create all kinds of fun approaches, both in introductions and in the other ways reviewed in this video. So I hope it'll do the same for you over the years. If this has been helpful, please share this video with other people out there. I really appreciate your help in getting this video out to more people. If you are so inclined, we would love to have you join the Patreon and our Patreon community. It's a really fantastic community. We love the conversations we have, all of us together, and I'd love for you to join us. Please look at the links down below on how to join. And I hope that this montage video brings you the happiest of happy days.
Sunday, Monday, happy days.